Welcome to the debate. Welcome to Cognitive Dose. We're here, as always, curing blind spots, cultivating intellect, and shattering cognitive bias. Today, we're diving into a framework that has pretty much completely taken over the productivity world. I'm talking about Cal Newport's concept of deep work.
Right. The supposed holy grail of the modern knowledge economy.
I mean, it really is framed exactly like that. Deep work is defined as professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration. So work that pushes your cognitive capabilities to their absolute limit. Newport basically argues that this ability is the ultimate superpower of the 21st century.
Yeah, because the underlying premise is that we're all just, drowning in shallow work. The constant emails, the Slack pings, the meetings.
Exactly. And the stakes are incredibly high right now. To survive what MIT economists call the Great Restructuring, when machines and global outsourcing are hollowing out the middle class, you have to be able to master hard things quickly. You have to produce at an elite level. And Newport roots this entirely in human biology, which I honestly find fascinating.
So we're talking about the deliberate practice research here.
Yes, exactly. Anders Ericsson's work. It comes down to myelination. When you focus intensely on a very specific, difficult skill, you force a specific neural circuit in your brain to fire in isolation. And that repetitive firing triggers cells to wrap layers of myelin, which is like a fatty tissue around the neurons.
Right, so it acts like premium insulation on a copper wire.
Exactly. The thicker the myelin, the faster and cleaner the neural circuit fires. That's the biological mechanism behind true expertise. And the catch is, you simply cannot isolate those circuits and build that myelin if you're simultaneously checking your inbox or, glancing at your phone. Elite expertise literally requires distraction-free isolation.
Okay, so that's the biological foundation he's claiming. But how does he explain the damage of everyday office work?
Well, it comes down to a concept introduced by Sophie Leroy called attention residue. When you switch from task A to task B, say you're writing a complex report and you just take a 2-second glance at an unresolved email, your attention doesn't cleanly follow you back to the report. A thick residue of your attention remains stuck on that email.
So your brain is basically trying to run two operating systems at once.
Right, and it literally devastates your cognitive performance. That's why extreme high performers utilize strategies like extreme batching. They isolate themselves for days at a time to mathematically eradicate that residue.
Okay, I have to jump in here. I really have to stop you. Because you are sounding way, way too enthusiastic about a premise that is, frankly, epistemologically bankrupt.
Wait, bankrupt? I mean, the science is heavily cited throughout the entire book. Attention residue is a foundational concept.
It's cited, sure. But the empirical justifications holding this whole theory together are incredibly fragile. Let's look at this so-called attention residue. That concept has consistently failed to replicate in modern science.
Failed to replicate? But Leroy's lexical decision games showed clear cognitive lag when people were interrupted. They were measurably slower.
What they showed was a mere motivational deficit. It is not some hardwired biological inability to task switch. Your brain isn't a 1990s desktop computer struggling to buffer an old program. And honestly, the methodology Newport uses to define these strict biological limits on modern knowledge work, do you even know what studies he's extrapolating from?
Well, the deliberate practice research, obviously, and cognitive psychology.
He is citing typing speed studies on Croydon Postman from the 1970s. And worse, he's using data from World War I munitions workers suffering from chemical fatigue.
Okay, but I mean, human fatigue is human fatigue, right? If the brain is physically exhausted from switching.
No, absolutely not. You cannot hammer a false equivalence between the repetitive physical strain of a World War I factory worker and the complex, dynamic cognitive labor of a modern professional. It is completely intellectually dishonest to compare assembling artillery shells to rapid, high-level synthesis.
Look, the core idea isn't just about fatigue, though. It's about how you organize your environment to produce value. The book actually addresses the need for synthesis with the hub and spoke model. It acknowledges that you need the hub of connectivity for serendipity, but you still need the isolated spoke to do the actual genius work.
Ah, yes. The brilliant spoke.
Right. Take Carl Jung, for example. He was heavily engaged in the Zurich coffee house culture, debating and lecturing. That was his hub. But when he needed to actually write his groundbreaking psychological theories, he retreated to his Bollinger Tower, a solid stone structure in the woods with no electricity. He needed that total isolation to extract value from those chaotic inputs.
Wow. Okay, let's talk about the Carl Jung example, because this exposes the massive, unexamined foundation of socioeconomic and gendered privilege that this entire framework operates on.
Privilege? He literally built a stone tower with his own hands so he could focus. That's just raw dedication.
It is the absolute privilege of isolation. Jung's isolated genius in that stone tower was subsidized entirely by Emma Jung's invisible, uncompensated domestic labor and care work.
Well, obviously he had a family, and people supported him, but he was still the one doing the deep cognitive lifting in the tower.
He was playing monk in the woods while his wife managed his entire material reality. This book pathologizes essential relational work. It treats the people managing the logistics, the communication, the actual connective tissue of life as shallow distractions. And worse, it blames individuals for failing to achieve a state of isolation that actually requires massive systemic capital to sustain.
I think you're mischaracterizing the practical application here. The book isn't telling average workers to abandon their families and move to the woods. It's advocating for a craftsman approach to your tools, particularly digital tools.
Oh, you mean the extremely aggressive rule to just quit social media entirely?
Yes, because you have to apply the law of the vital few, the 80-20 rule. People like Malcolm Gladwell or Michael Lewis or Bill Gates with his famous Think Weeks, they completely abstain from the noisy network tools so they can ruthlessly focus on the 20% of activities that actually produce their massive success in the marketplace.
This is a textbook example of the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy, and it is maddening to listen to.
How is it a fallacy? They're objectively some of the most successful elite knowledge workers on the planet.
Because reverse engineering the idiosyncratic habits of statistical anomalies like Bill Gates completely ignores the massive silent majority of people who practiced identical isolation and failed entirely. It is aggressive survivorship bias.
But Gladwell literally proves that you don't need a constant digital presence to produce elite work. You can just focus on the craft.
Gladwell proves that if you already have legacy institutional backing, you don't need Twitter. This is a glaring, weird exclusion.
Weird exclusion?
Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. The book assumes a highly privileged baseline for its readers. For marginalized professionals, constant digital connectivity is not some shallow distraction. It is the essential democratic infrastructure required to bypass exclusionary institutional gatekeepers. They need the noisy bazaar to even get a seat at the table.
Okay, I hear the point about marginalized professionals needing networks to break into the industry. But surely once they are in, the actual day-to-day work still requires focus. I mean, we have to find some convergence here, like intentionality. Passively letting an inbox dictate your day is universally dangerous, right? We can agree on that.
No, I am not agreeing to that reductive compromise. You are desperately trying to salvage a framework that is fundamentally broken from the ground up.
I'm just saying that constant interruption can't possibly be the optimal way for the human brain to work.
You are still treating connectivity like a cognitive virus. For the vast majority of the modern economy, rapid communication, serendipity, and overlapping networks are the actual engines of value creation. Monastic isolation is an outdated exclusionary luxury.
I don't even know what to say to that. If focus isn't the superpower and network tools are just mandatory for everyone, then how are we supposed to actually get anything done without completely burning out?
You start by rejecting the elitist myth that your worth is measured by how well you can hide from the world. Use this knowledge to build your mental immunity against these rigid, privileged productivity hacks. Welcome to reality. Thanks for tuning in to Cognitive Dose. Keep shattering bias and don't forget to subscribe.